Sometimes you don't let go because you're strong. You let go because holding on is quietly destroying you. Let's be real, my friends. Letting go sounds poetic until you're the one doing it. Until you're the one staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering how the hell you feel like the loser, even though you're the one who chose peace. You see them out there laughing, posting, living like nothing ever mattered, while you're sitting there with a knot in your chest, asking yourself if walking away meant giving up, or worse, being left behind by your own decision. And that feeling, that's what we're diving into today. So if you've ever let someone go and still felt like you're the one who lost, press that like button, hit subscribe and stay with me, because this one's for you. Hey folks, imagine this. You've been holding on to a rope for so long, your hands are blistered, bleeding, raw. You finally let go, and the instant the rope slips from your grip, instead of relief, you feel the fall, the free fall. That moment where everything is quiet, but inside, you're screaming. That's what letting go feels like for most of us. It doesn't feel powerful. It feels like failure. It doesn't feel like rising. It feels like falling. And here's the kicker, the person on the other side of that rope. They never had rope burns. They weren't holding it like you were. We've been sold this lie, folks, that letting go means peace, that it's supposed to feel like some kind of brave, glorious march into the sunset. But the truth? Letting go of someone you still care about is one of the ugliest, most gut-wrenching things you'll ever do. It's not cinematic, it's chaotic. It's not strength you feel in the moment, it's emptiness. You're not walking away with fireworks behind you. You're walking away with quiet heartbreak and 100 questions your pride refuses to ask out loud. But here's the truth, no one wants to say out loud. It feels like loss because you gave something real. You showed up, you tried, you loved, you kept the door open long after they stopped knocking. That's not weakness, that's emotional bravery. People love to throw around words like clingy or dramatic when you feel things deeply, but I'll tell you what, it takes far more strength to love fully and walk away empty-handed than it does to keep your distance and pretend not to care. One of my favorite quotes goes like this: "The one who cares the most always bleeds the most." And folks, that's why you feel like you're losing, because your heart was in it. But don't confuse feeling with fact. Just because you hurt more doesn't mean you lost more. It means you showed up more. And I need you to understand something important. Just because it hurts doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. Pain is not a sign of failure. It's often the first sign of healing. So let's break this lie right here. You're not the one who lost. You're the one who let go. And in a world that teaches us to chase, to fix, to hold on longer than we should, letting go is rebellion. Letting go is wisdom. Letting go is loving yourself in the middle of confusion. And if no one told you this today, I'm telling you, you didn't lose. You outgrew. That's why it hurts. That's why it's quiet. Because you're not chasing anymore. You're rising. You're rising through stillness, through silence, through that aching space where something used to be. But don't worry. What's coming for you next doesn't require that kind of suffering. Say this with me and write it in the comments right now. I choose peace. That's your power. That's your direction. That's your reset. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stay with me. Because what's coming next is going to flip everything you thought you knew about letting go. Number 1, because you let go with love, not indifference. The hardest goodbyes aren't the ones screamed in anger. They're the quiet ones whispered through tears by people who still care. Letting go when you're angry? That's easy. Letting go when you've stopped feeling? That's convenient. But letting go when your heart is still beating for them? That's war. And you, my friend, were never trying to walk away. You were trying to hold on without losing yourself. That's why it hurts. That's why it feels like you're losing, because you let go with love, not with indifference. And there's a different kind of grief in that. A quiet, uncelebrated grief. Imagine giving someone your favorite book, filled with your notes, your memories, your underlines, and watching them leave it out in the rain. You didn't walk away because the book lost meaning. You walked away because they never bothered to read it. And yet, even as you turn around, you still look back, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'll pick it up this time. That's what it feels like when someone you love doesn't love you back the same way. It feels like you're the one giving up on the story, when in reality, you were the only one ever reading it. And here's the thing that no one really talks about. Why does it feel like I'm the one in pain? Why am I the one lying awake at night? Why are they out there, posting stories, smiling, vibing, while I'm just trying to breathe without checking their profile? You question everything. Did I walk away too soon? Should I have given them more time? Was I just too much? No, my friend, you weren't too much. You were just too much for someone who was too little with their love. You let go not because your love ran out, but because theirs never stepped up. And that's the part that stings. You thought love was enough. You believed that if you showed up enough, gave enough, stayed long enough, they'd see it. But they didn't. Or maybe they did. And that scared them more than losing you ever could. Because not everyone is ready to receive a love that honest, that present, that devoted. Some people are terrified of depth because depth requires them to see themselves. And you? You were a mirror they weren't ready to look into. Letting go with love means you still remember the way their voice sounded when they were vulnerable. It means you still catch your breath when you think of the moments that felt real, even if they were rare. It means you still wish them healing, even though they couldn't give you the same. And that's where people get it twisted. They think if you left, you stopped caring. Nah, you left because you finally realized your care wasn't enough to fix what they wouldn't even admit was broken. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is this: if I hurt this much, I must have done something wrong. But pain is not guilt. Pain is growth tearing through the walls of your old self. Pain is truth refusing to be ignored anymore. And yes, it's painful to let someone go who you still love. But it's even more painful to keep shrinking yourself to keep them comfortable. You didn't lose, my friend. You chose not to lose yourself. And let me say this loud for the folks in the back. Walking away from someone you love is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's realizing that love without respect is just manipulation with pretty words. It's knowing that your peace is not a price you should pay just to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. It's remembering that love is not about begging someone to meet you halfway. It's about being met with the same energy you give without having to ask for it. I know it's hard. I know every cell in your body is telling you to go back, to check in, to leave the door open just a little longer. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to close the door gently and walk away. Not because you hate them, not because you've stopped loving, but because you finally started loving you. So don't confuse your pain with failure. Don't mistake your tears for regret. This pain, it's proof that you showed up. It's proof that you gave love that meant something, that you didn't fake it, you didn't play games, you didn't keep score. You gave them a chance to be part of something real, and they weren't ready. That's not your burden to carry. So say it with me, folks. Say it in the comments. Say it out loud. Say it to your reflection if you have to. I let go with love. That's your strength. That's your power. That's your legacy. Don't hide from it. Don't apologize for it. Show the world that letting go doesn't mean you were weak. It means you were brave enough to stop trying to fix what was never yours to hold. And stay with me, because next, we're going deeper. We're going into the illusion that what you lost was real love. when it was really just emotional survival. You're not the one who lost, my friend. You're the one who woke up. Number 2, you gave depth. They gave confusion. Real love doesn't confuse you. It clarifies. It calms. If you're constantly asking where you stand, you're standing alone. Let's cut through the noise, my friends. One of the hardest truths to swallow is this: not everyone you give your heart to knows what to do with it. You gave depth, consistency, openness. You brought your whole self to the table. No games, no masks, but in return, you got mixed signals, emotional dodging, half-present conversations, and affection that felt like it came with an expiration date. And when it finally fell apart, it didn't feel like clarity. It felt like whiplash. It didn't feel like we didn't work. It felt like, how the hell did I end up here after giving so much of myself? Let me paint a picture, because I know some of you have lived it. Imagine diving into a pool you thought had water, only to hit concrete. You trusted, you jumped, you gave everything, but what you landed in wasn't real. It was just the illusion of depth. That's what happens when you give emotional intimacy to someone who never matched it. You keep waiting for them to catch up, to open up, to stop pulling away every time things start to feel real, but they don't. And the hardest part, you keep blaming yourself for not being enough, when really, they were never willing to meet you where you already were. It's not that they didn't give anything. That's what makes it confusing. They gave just enough to keep your hope alive, just enough to make you second-guess your intuition, just enough to keep you hanging on, wondering if this time might be different. But it never is. They drop breadcrumbs, and you turn those crumbs into a feast with your imagination. They send one nice message after days of distance, and you treat it like a sign that maybe they do care. That maybe they're just scared. That maybe if you're just a little more patient, a little more understanding, they'll finally let you in. But my friend, when someone really values you, you don't have to decode every word they say. You don't need a magnifying glass to find proof of their affection. Real care doesn't hide in the shadows of inconsistency. Let's be honest, you knew deep down. You saw the signs, the way they only showed up when it was convenient, the way they shut down when you needed reassurance, the way they made you feel like you were the problem for asking for connection. You kept giving them more of your light, hoping it would melt the walls they built, but all it did was burn you out. And still, you stayed. Not because you were naive, but because you believed in the possibility of love transforming things. Because your heart didn't want to let go of someone it had already imagined a future with. But the reality is, you can't build a stable home on emotional quicksand. You gave depth. They gave you confusion dressed up as chemistry. You gave your loyalty, and they gave you maybes. You gave your time, and they gave you silence. And every time you tried to bring up your feelings, they acted like you were being dramatic, needy, or too emotional. That's how people who fear depth protect themselves. They minimize the person who seeks it. They make you question your sanity so they don't have to question their own emotional absence. And here's the brutal truth. People don't confuse you because they're confused. People confuse you when they benefit from your uncertainty. As long as you were unsure, you stayed. As long as you had hope, you kept giving, and they never had to do the deep emotional work of choosing you fully, because you were already choosing them again and again without being asked. Now, let's break the lie wide open. You didn't scare them away. They weren't too overwhelmed by how much you cared. That's a nice fairy tale we tell ourselves to protect their image in our minds. The truth? They didn't have the emotional maturity to sit at the table you invited them to. They couldn't hold space for your depth because they hadn't even confronted their own. That's not on you. That's not your shame to carry. That's not your lesson to internalize as a flaw. But here's what is yours: your courage, your truth, your ability to feel deeply in a world that trains people to disconnect. You showed up with presence. You gave what most people are afraid to even admit they want. And now, even in the aftermath, even in the silence, even in the aching, you are still the one who gave something real. That is never a loss. That is never weakness. That is never failure. So, my friends, don't you dare dim your light just because someone else was too scared to stand in it. Don't dilute your emotions to become more digestible. Don't shrink your love to fit into someone's emotional vacancy. Because love should never leave you guessing. Love should never feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. Love should never require you to sacrifice your clarity just to stay connected. Say it with me right now and drop it in the comments so you never forget. I gave real. I choose clarity. That's your truth. That's your anchor. That's your power. And stay with me, because in the next part, we're going to talk about something even deeper. The pain of grieving not the person, but the potential you saw in them. Because sometimes what hurts the most is losing the version of them you created in your mind. And once you see that, everything changes. Number 3, you're grieving the potential, not the reality. One of the most painful truths you'll ever face is this. You're not mourning who they were. You're mourning who you thought they could become. Let's just call it out, folks. Sometimes the heartbreak you're sitting in isn't about losing a person. It's about losing a fantasy, a future you wrote with their name in every chapter, a vision that felt so real in your mind it's almost impossible to accept it was never mutual. That's the trap no one warns you about. The fact that you're not just grieving the relationship, you're grieving the potential you projected onto it. It's like building a house in your head, brick by emotional brick. You imagined the laughter in the kitchen, the quiet mornings together, the safety of knowing they'd be there when life got hard. You weren't just seeing who they were in the moment, you were seeing who they could be. And every good moment you had with them, you turned those into proof. Proof that your vision was valid, that you weren't reaching, that maybe, just maybe, it was real. But here's where it hurts. What you saw in them, they never grew into. Maybe they hinted at it. Maybe they said the right things once or twice. Maybe they touched your soul for a second and then vanished emotionally. But at the end of the day, your pain isn't just about their absence. It's about the emotional investment you made in someone who never showed up as the person you believed they were capable of becoming. It's like falling in love with a reflection in the water, beautiful, full of light, always just within reach. But every time you try to grab it, your hands come back empty. That's what potential is. It's what could be, not what is. And the difference between those two, that's where heartbreak lives. You keep replaying the good moments. That one night they opened up. That one weekend they looked at you like you were everything. That one time they made you feel safe, held, seen. But those moments weren't consistent. They were exceptions, not the pattern. And deep down, you knew it. But it's hard to walk away from a dream you've been fighting to protect, even if it's a dream that's been draining you piece by piece. This is why letting go feels like failure, because you didn't just lose them, you lost a version of yourself too. The version that kept believing, that kept hoping, that kept saying, if I just hold on a little longer. You lost the story you told yourself to survive the emptiness they kept leaving you in. That's not nothing. That kind of grief is real. That kind of grief cuts deeper than most people can see, because from the outside, it looks simple. Just move on. They weren't good for you. You dodged a bullet. But those people don't know about the invisible thread you felt, the bond that felt cosmic, even when it was chaotic. They don't understand how your nervous system got trained to crave the inconsistency, how your heart became addicted to the idea of potential so intensely you started to mistake breadcrumbs for a banquet. But here's the shift, my friends. Here's where the truth starts to set you free. They didn't fail to become who you needed. They simply succeeded in being exactly who they are. The potential you saw wasn't a lie, it just wasn't theirs to claim. And the sooner you stop waiting for them to become that person, the sooner you start becoming who you were always meant to be. That version of them you created, it came from a good place. It came from your depth, your capacity to love, your ability to believe in someone beyond their patterns. That's your gift. But gifts can be misused when we place them in the wrong hands. You weren't foolish for seeing potential. You were loving with hope. You were building with vision, and that's beautiful, but it's also dangerous when it becomes a reason to stay in cycles that are tearing you down. So let's break this lie once and for all. You didn't fail the relationship by leaving. You honored the truth by walking away from the illusion. You didn't lose something solid. You let go of something that was always shifting, always unstable, always just one emotional pull away from disappearing. That wasn't love. That was survival. That was fantasy. That was hope doing all the heavy lifting, while reality kept handing you red flags wrapped in false promises. And you want to know what's even more powerful than seeing someone's potential? Seeing your own. Realizing that all the energy you were pouring into trying to fix, heal, explain, convince, that energy belongs to you now. It's yours to use to build a life that isn't based on maybes, a life rooted in mutual love, in alignment, in reality, not the illusion of what might happen if they finally decided to grow. So here's your invitation today. Grieve the dream. Mourn the future that won't be. Let the version of them you imagined float away like smoke. And when you do, you make room for truth. You make room for yourself. You make room for someone who doesn't just show you who they could be, but who actually shows up as someone already ready to meet you where you are. Say it with me. Say it proud. Say it in the comments. Say it until your heart starts to believe it. I release the fantasy. That's your healing. That's your closure. That's your quiet strength rising. And stay with me, because next we're talking about why it felt like you were doing all the work. Why you were showing up, sacrificing, adjusting, while they just coasted. That truth, it's going to hurt, but it's also going to set you free. Number 4, you fought for something they barely defended. Love is not measured by how long you hold on. It's measured by who shows up beside you when things get heavy. Let's be honest, folks. You didn't just love them. You fought for them. Day after day, night after night. You fought for the connection, for the bond, for the potential of what you believed you two could become. You read between the lines when they barely gave you words. You excused the silence, explained away the inconsistency, made room for their wounds while yours went unnoticed. And through it all, you stayed. You held on. You tried harder. Not because you didn't see the cracks, but because you hoped they'd eventually help you fill them. But let's tell the truth that your heart's been whispering for a while now. You were the only one holding the damn rope. You were the only one reinforcing the bridge every time they took a hammer to it. You adjusted your tone, softened your needs, compromised on things that mattered to your soul, all while they coasted through the relationship like a passenger, never the driver. And when it ended, when you finally had nothing left to give, it looked like you quit. But you didn't. You burned out. You ran out of emotional rope because you were the only one pulling. It's wild, isn't it? How you kept defending the bond, even when they wouldn't defend you. You fought to be understood, to be seen, to be reassured, while they stood on the sidelines acting like you were too much for simply asking for basic emotional presence. And the sickest part, you started believing it. You started thinking maybe love really is about staying quiet. Maybe it's noble to carry the whole thing on your back. Maybe you're strong for enduring emotional starvation. But my friends, strength isn't found in suffering. And love, real love, it's not proven by how many times you tolerate being ignored. It's not noble to beg for effort. It's not romantic to fight for someone who doesn't even bother to pick up their sword. Let me ask you something. When was the last time they fought for you? Truly? When was the last time they put ego aside and said, "You matter. Let me show up"? When was the last time they looked at the pain in your eyes and didn't deflect, didn't get defensive, didn't minimize it as drama or insecurity? If you're struggling to answer that, it's not because you're forgetful. It's because it rarely, if ever, happened. But you were always ready. Ready to explain your side with compassion. Ready to make room for their fear, their wounds, their silence. Ready to apologize even when it wasn't your fault, just to keep the peace. You were ready to love them at their worst, while hoping someday they'd love you back at your most vulnerable. And here's what no one tells you: relationships don't end because people stop loving. They often end because one person gets tired of being the only one trying, and that's where you landed, exhausted. Not because you didn't care anymore, but because you finally realized caring alone wasn't enough. You were carrying both your heart and theirs. You were building for two, and all they had to do was show up. But they didn't. Maybe they liked the fact that you fought for it. Maybe they relied on it. Maybe deep down they knew you were the one doing the emotional heavy lifting. And maybe they figured, why change anything? They'll always be here. That's the lie they told themselves, and that's the weight they let you carry, because they didn't have the courage to meet you in the middle. But let's break this pattern wide open. You didn't lose someone who tried. You lost someone who got comfortable with you doing all the trying. You lost someone who thought emotional distance was something you should just accept. Someone who mistook your empathy for obligation. Someone who thought your effort would never run out. But effort without reciprocity isn't love. It's self-abandonment in slow motion. And maybe, just maybe, the hardest pill to swallow is this. They didn't stop you from leaving because they didn't need to. They knew you'd always come back. Until you didn't. And now the silence is loud, but not as loud as the realization that you were showing up fully in a place they never even bothered to unpack their emotional bags. So don't feel guilty for walking away. Don't sit in shame over the fact that it feels like quitting. You didn't quit. You graduated. You stopped fighting a war where the other person refused to pick a side. You stopped showing up for a connection that made you question your own value. You stopped begging someone to treat you like you mattered. And let me say it clearly for anyone who still doubts their decision. Choosing peace over constant emotional labor is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the moment your soul finally said, "I deserve more than this." You were not too emotional. You were not too much. You were too present for someone who didn't know what to do with presence. So breathe that in, my friend, and say this with me. Say it in the comments. Say it with your chest. Say it to the past version of you who stayed too long. I stopped fighting alone. That's not defeat. That's power. That's healing. That's clarity. And stick with me, because in the next part, we're going to unpack something deeper. Why your body feels like it's breaking even after your mind says you're free. Why letting go doesn't just hurt emotionally, it shocks your whole nervous system. And once you understand that, you'll stop blaming yourself for the ache and start reclaiming your peace. Number 5. Your nervous system got addicted to the chaos. Sometimes it's not love you miss, it's the adrenaline of the inconsistency you mistook for connection. Let's break something down that no one ever teaches you in love songs or fairy tales, my friends. You didn't just love them, you adapted to them. And not in a peaceful, soul-aligning way. No, you adapted to their inconsistency. You learned how to survive on emotional crumbs. You trained your nervous system to anticipate the roller coaster, the high when they showed up, the low when they disappeared, the craving, the silence, the chase, the reward, the withdrawal. That wasn't love. That was a chemical loop disguised as a bond. You weren't just emotionally attached. You were neurologically wired. Wired to wait for the message that never came. Wired to check your phone at 2 a.m. like it held your dignity. Wired to replay old conversations, looking for meaning in words that were probably empty. That's what inconsistency does. It keeps you locked in a cycle where your body starts to confuse unpredictability with passion and pain with longing. It's not just your heart breaking, it's your nervous system coming off a drug it got hooked on. And I know it sounds harsh, but let's be real here. That constant anxiety you felt, that was your body telling you something was off. But instead of running from the fire, you stayed. Not because you loved chaos, but because chaos became your baseline. You got used to it. You called it excitement. You called it chemistry. You told yourself, real love isn't always easy. But let me tell you something. Love isn't supposed to feel like a panic attack. You kept hoping that one day the storm would calm, that they'd finally choose you fully, that the good moments would become the norm, not the rare exception. You held on through every emotional high because it felt like proof that something real was there. But here's the thing, anyone can be warm once in a while. That doesn't make it love. That makes it manipulation if it's wrapped in silence, distance and withdrawal. Your brain got addicted to the reward system. Every time they reappeared after being distant, it felt like a hit, a dopamine spike, a rush of maybe this time they're staying. You felt chosen, but only after being ignored, and the longer it went on, the deeper the addiction went. You didn't know it, but your body was being trained to equate love with suffering, attention with relief, affection with reward. And when you finally walked away, your mind said peace, but your body screamed, "Where's the chaos?" That's why you feel restless. That's why even after letting them go, you still crave the very person who hurt you. That's why silence feels heavier than their neglect ever did. It's not because they were your soulmate. It's because your nervous system got hijacked. It's because love became a war zone and you called it home. Let me ask you something. How many times did your stomach drop when they pulled away? How many times did you feel like you were losing them and yourself in the same breath? How many nights did you lay in bed, mentally negotiating your worth just to justify staying? That's not connection. That's trauma bonding. That's what happens when love is mixed with fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear that if you stop giving, they'll stop caring. But the truth is, they weren't really caring in the first place. They were responding just enough to keep you on the hook. And I say this with love. You deserve better than survival mode. You deserve a connection that doesn't trigger your fight or flight response. You deserve love that feels like rest, not rescue. And if that kind of love feels unfamiliar or boring right now, that's okay. It's not because it's wrong. It's because your body has only ever known emotional turbulence. Stillness feels like absence when chaos is all you've known. But that can change. That will change. And here's the beauty in it. Your nervous system can be rewired. Your mind can be reprogrammed. Your heart can learn that love isn't supposed to feel like being tested. It's supposed to feel like being held. It's supposed to feel like safety, like warmth, like peace that doesn't leave when the conversation gets hard. Let's stop romanticizing the ones who kept you guessing. Let's stop glorifying the chase. Let's stop believing that love is only real when it hurts. Because that belief, that's what keeps you returning to people who never had the capacity to love you in the first place. You're not weak for missing them. You're not broken for craving their attention. Your body is just unlearning a pattern, and that takes time. It takes gentleness. It takes radical self-honesty. And above all, it takes the courage to sit with the silence you once feared and realize it's not killing you. It's healing you. Say it with me. Say it in the comments. Speak it over your healing. Remind your nervous system with every breath. I release the chaos. That's your anchor. That's your reset. That's your beginning. And stay with me, my friend, because next we're going to break the illusion that letting go means failure. We're going to unpack the myth that if you couldn't make it work, you must not have been enough. And once that lie is gone, You'll start to see that letting go wasn't weakness. It was the bravest decision your heart ever made. Number 6, you mistook releasing control for failure. Sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do is not fight harder, but finally surrender to what is no longer growing. Let's get real, my friends. This one cuts deep. You didn't want to let go. You didn't plan for it. You weren't sitting there waiting for the day you'd have to walk away from someone you once saw forever with. You fought. You gave grace. You stayed longer than your peace could afford. And when you finally let go, when you finally stopped fighting for someone to see you, to choose you, to show up, you didn't feel strong. You felt like you failed. But here's the truth no one ever taught you. Releasing control is not the same as losing. It's actually how you win yourself back. See, somewhere along the way, you started carrying this belief that if you just did more, loved better, waited longer, spoke softer, you could fix it. That love was a problem to solve instead of something to receive. And every time they pulled away, you tried to close the distance by working harder, not because you were desperate, but because you believed in the good moments, believed in their potential, believed in the future you saw so clearly even when they didn't. And when it still didn't work, when all your efforts ended in confusion, inconsistency and heartbreak, you turned that pain inward. Maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe I gave up too soon. But hear this now. You didn't give up. You woke up. You woke up to the realization that a connection being hard doesn't always mean it's deep. You woke up to the pattern of always being the one initiating, explaining, adjusting, apologizing. You woke up to your own exhaustion, your own anxiety, your own heartbreak, and you finally stopped calling it love. That's not quitting. That's clarity. Letting go feels like failure because your heart was all in. And when your heart is all in, walking away doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like defeat. It feels like something you should have been able to fix. But not everything broken is yours to repair. Not everyone distant is waiting to be reached. Sometimes they're just not ready. Sometimes they don't know how to love without control. Sometimes they weren't meant to stay beyond the lesson, and that's where your freedom begins. Not when they change, not when they wake up, but when you stop trying to control what was never yours to manage. You wanted them to see your value. You wanted them to finally say, "I'm ready. I see you now. I choose you." And when they didn't, it felt like you failed the test. But my friend, your value is not proven by how long you can tolerate emotional confusion. It's not validated by how many red flags you can fold into origami hearts. You don't earn love by suffering for it. Control made you feel safe. It gave you purpose. It let you believe that your effort could somehow fill in their emotional gaps. But control also kept you stuck. It kept you blaming yourself. It kept you from seeing that someone who loves you will not require this much convincing. It kept you performing, proving, trying to earn what should have been given freely. Letting go of control feels like failure because control gave you an illusion of power, but it was never real power. Real power is knowing when to stop. Real power is recognizing that begging for connection isn't the same as building it. Real power is choosing peace over potential. And peace doesn't come when they come back. Peace comes when you do. So stop calling it a loss. Stop calling it weakness. Stop writing the narrative where you're the one who couldn't hold on. You held on longer than anyone else would have. You stayed loyal to the idea of what could be, while they stayed committed to their comfort zone. That's not your shame to carry anymore. Letting go doesn't mean you failed to love them enough. It means you finally loved yourself enough to walk away. That's your turning point. That's your redemption. That's the quiet power most people will never understand. Because the truth is, most people don't have the strength to walk away from someone they still love. But you did. You had to break your own heart to protect your soul. You had to grieve the version of love you wanted just to give yourself a shot at the one you deserve. So let me leave you with this, folks. If you're standing in that space right now, with shaking hands and a heavy chest, wondering if you made the right decision by letting go, you did. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because it finally stopped costing you your self-worth. That's how you know. That's how you rise. Say this out loud, type it in the comments, shout it in the mirror if you have to. Letting go saved me. That's your truth. That's your healing. That's your story now. And if this entire journey spoke to you, if you saw yourself in every word, do one thing for me. Press that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We're not just building content here. We're building clarity, confidence, and emotional freedom. Stay with me, because your story's not ending. It's just beginning.